Hello all, welcome back. Today we will be continuing with our first lecture regarding history of rockets. Right? Now continuing, first we will discuss what are the course outcomes that is being expected from the out of the course at the end. So first, as a part of your module 1, at the end of the course, students should be able to identify the equations of various orbits for launch vehicle ascent trajectories. Second, classify the operating principles of rocket engines for determining the performance characteristics of various multi-stage rockets. Discuss the propellant crane design concepts implemented in solid rocket propulsion for selecting optimal crane design based on the requirements of your launch vehicle. Identify various aerosol burning and combustion instability performances parameters for determining the burning rate and combustion characteristics. Compare different propellant concepts implemented in rocket for identifying the optimal combinations based on particular application. Make use of the concepts of electrical propulsion system for selecting the suitable techniques as per the mission requirement. Right? First, we will discuss regarding the history and the developments of different space programs in your country, in all the countries. First, let us understand what do you mean by rocket propulsion. Right? The term rocket propulsion, if you are breaking up, the term propulsion comes from a Greek word which defines two words, propel or to move forward. Right? The term which is derived from a Greek alphabet or Greek word containing a definition of called propel, which means to move forward. And if in terms we are using it with respect to your rocket propulsion, it will be moving your rocket forward. Now, basically rocket propulsion is an essential transportation technology for the rapid growth of human communication and exploration. Why in terms of human communication? Because based on the rockets, we are launching satellites, right? And exploration by sending out rovers, particularly in search of an extraterrestrial life, right? If you are going for your history of the rocket propulsion, the first documented evidences, particularly in terms of using of rocket propulsion or the principle of rocket propulsion, begins from ancient China, right? But it has been rapidly developed during the war, particularly Cold War, and it has become an essential technology for your late 20th century. Now, let us understand the rocket propulsion, particularly in what way it has been developed. First, the hero of Alexandria is being created with inventing of a rocket principle, right? He was a mathematician and an inventor who devised many machines using air pressure, water and steam, including a fire engine and a fountain. The real inventor of certain term, particularly in form of rocket, was certainly Chinese. The invention is the practical results of experiments with gunpowder and bamboo tubes. Now, let us understand in what way the hero of Alexandria invented a particular rocket principle. Although he doesn't know it acting as a rocket principle, it was a new thing for him to study or understand. Right? What he did basically, in a metallic sphere, keeping out two exits, right? Keeping on two exits and mounted on a single ball, which is directly posted on your fireplace, right? What happens as soon as the complete fireplace or the container having your water is completely sealed, and send it to your simple disk or holding device. Now, as soon as the water gets heated, what happens is the water passes through these pipes, which is onto your chamber. Then they are getting exited through your nozzle or the small areas through which provided onto the sphere. Now, based on this, what happens as soon as the steam gets out right? As soon as the steam get out of your nozzle, it tends to apply or give out certain reaction, right? Certain reaction for the outward steam. Now, as the sphere is mounted on a freely moving support, due to the reaction of the steam, it tends to move in certain direction, particularly either clockwise or anti-clockwise, right? Now, this is the basis principle for understanding your principle of rocket, right? Although the inventor himself might not be able to understand in what way that the rocket is working on, but that is a basis. Now, coming to your next, which is nothing but a part of Chinese, what they did is basically they used bamboo tubes, right, which are closed on one side, and they inserted gunpowder on one of the sides and few balls, particularly it can be a projectile in other words, and upon igniting of your gunpowder, what happens? The projectile gets shot out, or in a bamboo tube itself, it gets uplifted. The bamboo tube will get uplifted over a certain period of time until unless the gunpowder is burned. Now, the hero performed it all mathematically, right? Although small experimental, but the Chinese perform the practical oriented experiments regarding the rockets. Now, first, the rocket development was used as a weapon under Oriental War in Chinese. Kublai Khan used it in Japanese invasion in the year of 1275, whereas by 1300s, the rockets were used as a weapons, particularly bombardment weapons, as far as west as Spain, and they were used by against the British Army in India by Tipu Sultan in the year of 1700. Similarly, Sir William Congreve, who is also called as an artillery acer, realized the potential and developed it into a military rocket, which was under 20th century. Right now, first they appeared famously in the siege of Fort McHenry in the American War of Independence and featured in a song as "The Rocket's Red Glare." Right, at about the same time, the rockets came in the standard use as signals to carry lines from ship to ship and in the rescue of shipwrecked mariners. Also, a role in which they are still used. Right. In order to understand, I'll just draw a simple example. Basically, if you're considering as ship 1, ship 2, in order to transfer, right, in order to carry forward one of the raw resource from one side to other side, rockets are used particularly to create a line of tow in such a way that it is used to carry the personnel as well as the goods from ship to ship. Nowadays also, a shorter form, particularly guns, are used in order to do the same in your naval industry or navy. Next, there are few pioneers who did perform or who are credited for development of the rockets, particularly Goddard, Oberth, and von Braun, Piosby, and Horlev. We will discuss one of them. Among these, few were practical engineers, few are mathematicians, and other were dreamers. Now, the first is the imaginative concept of rocket as a vehicle for gaining access to space, and the second is the practical development of rocket. Among these, two scientists perform, or else two scientists have developed against the mathematician form, and others developed against the practical engineer by experimenting. First is nothing but your Constantine Piosky. He was a mathematician who wrote about the space travel, including weightlessness and escape velocity of Earth. In a paper he published in year of 1903, he derived the rocket equation and dealt it in detail with the use of the rocket propulsion for space travel. And in 1924, he described the multi-stage rockets, although he invented multi-stage rockets, right? He is a person who is simply a mathematician who derived an equation, particularly mathematical equation, to give out a clear idea for your escape velocity or velocity of rocket, right? This we will be seeing under further modules, right? Now, according to your velocity of rocket, he further derived few terms related to your space travel, particularly escape velocity and weightlessness in space, right? Based on this velocity of rocket, also called as your rocket equation, we will be deriving or else we will be finding out the total velocity of your complete launch vehicle that we have been created. And based on this velocity of rockets, he also described regarding the multi-staging of rockets, right? He never experimented with rockets, but his work was almost theoretical. He identified an exhaust velocity component, which is most important performance parameter in rockets. He realized that higher temperature and low molecular weight produced by the liquid fuels would be more important for achieving high exhaust velocity. Particularly in any rocket, what we need, particularly fuel plus oxidizer. Now, under this, in order for any rocket to move forward, we will discuss this term particularly in further modules. I am just giving an outline as it's only historical development. The rate at which the exhaust gases, particularly velocity of exhaust, moves, same to an equal opposite and reaction, will be moving the velocity of rocket, right? At what rate the exhaust velocity varies. The similar way, the velocity of the whole rocket is also varying. That so this exhaust velocity is an important performance parameter. Similarly, he also realized while calculating that the temperature, the higher temperature of the exhaust velocity with low molecular weight, which is produced by fuels, would be more important in order to maximize the high exhaust velocity. He also identified liquid oxygen, particularly among one of the fuels, and hydrogens as suitable propellants for space rockets. Right? Nowadays, most of the rockets are dependent on your liquid oxygen, hydrogen, as well as liquid kerosene. We will discuss the type of rockets further. Right? The second person is Hermann Oberth. Right? He is similar to Constantine Twerspeed, who performed the mathematical calculations related to space travel. Particularly, his thesis was rejected and he later published it as a book in 1923, which examined the use of rockets for space travel, which also includes the design of liquid fueled engines using alcohol as a fuel and liquid oxygen as oxidizer. His analysis was again mathematical, but he didn't himself carry out any rocket experiments at the time. But he gave out all the required data in order to create a better rocket. Later, in United States, Robert Goddard, a professor of physics at Clark University in Massachusetts, was an early, as in 1914, granted patents, particularly in the design of liquid fuel rocket combustion chambers and nozzles, right? Based on the mathematical equations that all the prior, Oberth and Constantine, he developed the physical models and experimented on those, right? Right, it's an experimental model of a rocket which consists of your liquid fueled rocket combustion chamber as well as a nozzle to validate his reasons. And the same patents were later bought by NASA in order to develop their own liquid propellant rocket systems. Right? What are invention? Those include the use of gyros for guidance of your rockets, and use of vanes in the jet stream to steer or to maneuver the rockets, and the use of valves in the propellant lines to stop or start an engine as on when required, and the use of turbo pumps to deliver propellant into the combustion chamber to create the necessary pressure and the necessary combustion temperatures to effectively increase the exhaust velocity, as we have discussed earlier, and to use liquid oxygen, particularly which we carry around, to cool the exhaust nozzle, all of which are crucial for your development of your modern rocket. He launched his first liquid fuel rocket from Auburn, Massachusetts on 15th March 1926. It weighed around 5 kgs and was powered by liquid oxygen and petrol. It reached the height of 12.5 meters, and it was his first launch that he created on his own and experimented. Right? And by the time of the Second World War, Russia and Germany were ahead of other nations in rocketry, where Germany was the most of all. Where Werner Braun was one of the enthusiastic engineers who took the step of joining military research station at Pennymead. Here was developed an A4 liquid fuel rocket, which became the notorious V2 weapon, and which, from its launch site in Germany, carried a 1,000-pound bombing into the center of the London. In the end, as it is known well, the Russians took Peenemünde and the contents, whereas the US took Von Braun and its key member of the team. During World War II, Germany, who was looking for ways to acquire the whole European continent, based on the books that have been published by Oberth as well as Goddard, many people come forward to train, or as an enthusiastic person, amateurs, they try to create rockets, and the German army has a small interest regarding the same. So what they did is basically they took the person to work for the army, among which Von Braun was one of the enthusiastic engineers who joined the army research station at Peenemünde, right, where he developed, along with his team, he developed an A4 liquid fuel rocket, which later became also called as V2 weapon. V2 weapon is being used to drop a 1,000-pound bomb at the center of the London. It has certain range, and it was the first ever missile or rocket to be used gradually. And at the end, when the Germany fell, the Russians Russians and the USA in conjunction, they took down the Germany and took Peenemünde to the Russians, which is a key site along with the contents, infrastructure and all, whereas the USA took Von Braun and the key members to further enhance their own development of the rockets. Now, before going to others, we'll divide ourselves into your Russian, US as well as other space programs, so that you will be better understanding the different timelines through which the development has been made. Right? The Russian space program, earlier, before the division, also called as USSR, was the most active and focused in the history, because it has a credit of launching the first artificial satellite, first man in the space, first spacecraft on the moon, and the first docking of 2 spacecraft and the first space station. All these are the first in the history of your space kind, which are credited to Russian, partly under USSR and partly under Soviet. Now, in the period of 1957 to 59, 3 satellites and 2 successful lunar probes are launched by USSR, whereas in 1961, Yuri Gagarin, the person on the right, became the first man in the space. At the same time, several flybys of Mars and Venus were accomplished. What do you mean flybys? Small info. Onto a celestial object, whenever your celestial, particularly planet, comet, or any satellite, whenever you are sending an object, right, without being in orbit of the object, as well as without in contact with respect to that celestial object, it will be passing along, right? It will be passing along. That particular condition is called a flyby, right? Next, Sergei Orlov. Under Russian space program, there are two specific persons, particularly technicians or engineers, who are the most prominent persons to develop Russian program till date, right? First one will be Sergei Orlov and Valentin Glushko, right? These two, one Glushko was engine designer, whereas Orlov was your rocket designer, right? Based on them, they developed your R series engines. We'll discuss, right? In 1930, Glushko had developed liquid fueled engines which uses regenerative cooling, turbopumps, and throttles, right? The method of regenerative cooling, turbopumps, and throttles we'll discuss further under Module 3 as well as Module 4, right? And based on these, the famous R series rockets, particularly R100, R200, Russian rockets are made, which are currently in use, right? The rockets, or particularly the engines, were made so perfect or better than what has been ever imagined, that till date they are in use under certain specific rocket launch vehicles, particularly Vostok, right? Next, now coming to your United States program, it has origin with the works of Tuskegee as well as Oberth. The national expression in the dream of Robert Goddard, put it under experimental, and its final achievement through the will of an American president and a people, and its unique human history. After the Second World War, the United States conducted rocket development based on the indigenous technology and the new ideas coming from the German program involving von Braun, right? As soon as the Germany fell, Russia as well as US split up the resources at the Peenemünde. Particularly, the human resource von Braun and his core members of the team were taken by the USA in order to develop their own, whereas the Russia took the hardware, particularly all the contents at that site under their control. The army developed a Redstone rocket, basically an improvement upon A4 by the help of your von Braun. The Navy has its own program based on your indigenous Viking, right? Among these, the Redstone version was approved under the year of 1955, which was empowered by using existing technology to launch a small satellite. But only 3 months later, the Navy, the more sophisticated Vanguard project from Naval Research Lab, was put into its place. But after two successful suborbital tests, the first satellite launch was set in December of 1957, just after the successful of Sputnik 1 flight. Right? Let me recap. Sputnik 1 flight is Russian first satellite. Right? On 31st Jan 1958, it launched the United States' first satellite, which weighed around 14 kgs. And the first stage among the Redstone was the burning liquid oxygen and alcohol, and the upper stage was a Jupiter C solid motor. The satellite was both programmatic and a scientific success because it discovered a Van Allen radiation belts. For example, this can be found out easily. So let's say if you are having Earth having two poles, from north to south, we are having continuous, right, continuous magnetic field, and there will be a certain region in which this magnetic field fails, or the radiation gets trapped in between. Those are called your Van Allen radiation belts, right? These have been discovered by your first rocket that has been developed from the Redstone project. Next, NASA, which now currently called as Space Administration Agency, was set up on the 1st October 1958 and began its looking at plans for a moon landing. Now, whether a debate while considering for moon landing, a debate has been made whether to refuel in orbit or to complete the mission through the direct launch of the Earth. Now, regarding the same, a similar debate took place in Russia a few years later. Now, based on these two separate concepts in order to moon, right? The later concept required a huge, particularly a direct launch from Earth would require a huge yet to be designed rocket called, which they codenamed as Nova. But finally, a concept of Apollo using a lunar orbiter emerged as the most practical and prominent solution. The concept was fixed in July 1962, after which work has been begun on Saturn. Saturn is nothing but a launch vehicle that is being planned to take away the Apollo aircraft towards the moon. Now, under its final form, as the Apollo 11 launcher, the Saturn V was the largest rocket ever built. Now, because it is planned to take the mass, particularly a satellite or any vehicle, directly to the moon, right? Because in order to send its heavy payload to the moon in the direct flight from the surface of the Earth, it needed a powerful high thrust engines to lift off the ground, the high exhaust speed to achieve the lunar transfer trajectory. This lunar transfer trajectory we will be discussing under your upcoming classes. Now, the lower stage was based on the liquid oxygen and kerosene engine, which had emerged via the Redstone rocket, right? And from the original A4 engine that used liquid oxygen and alcohol. The systems are very similar to your previously developed Redstone rocket and German A4, and the final development of those two have been considered while creating the lower stages of your Saturn V. Now, in order to achieve sufficient thrust and to lift 3 million kgs of rocket off the pad, there are total 5 F1 engines, which are the largest ever built, with thrust of total 34 metric Newton using liquid oxygen and kerosene. The exhaust velocity of these engines was 2650 meter per second, or also called as 2.6 kilometer per second, right? But they had a total thrust. The important innovation for the second and third stages was to use liquid hydrogen as a fuel, because storage of liquid hydrogen requires less volume compared to your liquid oxygen or liquid fuel, right? It was first operational use of this fuel and was vital in achieving necessary velocity to reach the moon. Now, on the right, it was one of the figure of your Saturn V rocket, in which these are my 5 F1 engines, which are onto my ground stage, my second, third, fourth, and Apollo. Right? These are the various stages through which we will be going. Next, the second stage, particularly this, has 5 J2 engines, similarly to your first stage, but they will be using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, providing a total thrust of 5.3 metric Newton and with an exhaust velocity of 4210 meter per second. Similarly, third stage will be having a single J2 engine, providing a thrust of 1.05 meganewton. The first manned operation launch took place in December 1968, whereas the first lunar landing mission was launched on 16 July 1969. The main technical advance since the Saturn V was the development of space shuttle. Right? The idea of space plane particularly originates at least as early as 1920. It was proposed by Frederick Sander. Right? The final selection of delta wing vehicle was made partly on the basis of the Air Force need to launch military payloads into polar orbits. Regarding polar orbits, we will be discussing in the next lecture orbits and trajectories. The large wing meant the shuttle could return from polar launch attempt to Vandenberg Air Force Base in the event of an abort. Right? On the right is one of your space planes that have been designed. As first orbiter called Columbia, the shuttle concept enabled the reuse of engines and control systems. Propellant was carried out in a disposable drop tank and solid boosters were used which can be recharged with propellant for reuse. The first shuttle flew under April 1981. Right? The shuttle with a total mass of 2000 tons. Right? 2000 tons and a total thrust liftoff of 26 meganewton, both at a 60% of Saturn V. The height was 56 meters, about half of your Saturn V, whereas the orbiter is fitted with your 3 liquid hydrogen oxygen engines. These are below this you will be having. Let me just explain. This I don't know whether you can able to see or not. These are your engines, SSME engines, which provided the high exhaust velocity. Let me just break it up. This will be your solid rocket motor. This will be your fuel tank, which we have discussed earlier as drop tank. And this will be your shuttle. Right? The propellants for these were contained under external drop tank, and at the launch the main engines were ignited, and after a few seconds, when the thrust was stable, the twin solid boosters were fired. Boosters are dropped off when exhausted, and the orbiter contributed into the space under the power of your main engines, particularly SSME engines. When the propellant was exhausted, the tank, particularly external tank, was discarded. The orbiter is fitted with small storable propellant engines, particularly for orbital maneuvering and deorbiting. These are your maneuvering engines. Right? Now, out of 24 successful flights, there were 24 successful flights before the loss of Challenger due to a failed gas seal on one of the boosters, right? That underlined in the need for continuous vigilance and attention. To detail, when dealing with such powerful forces, the shuttle is also the primary means of launching components into International Space Station, also called as ISS today, and the payload has capability of 24 tons to low Earth orbit is not matched by any of the current expendable launchers, although the Ariane 5, which we will be discussing further, has a capability similar to the shuttle for geosynchronous orbit. Right? Before this, I would like to discuss few terms regarding this space shuttle and Saturn V. Now, among these two, if you are considering for Saturn V, particularly the rocket which has taken us to the moon, these are completely expendable. Right? All the engines, all the tanks, everything, whatever we use, although these are having many subsystems and subsystems, fail-safes including, as soon as these are used, they are wasted because due to budgetary constraints. Right? Saturn we find took more amount of money rather than for per single launch, whereas there is less reusability. Less reusability of the rockets, particularly Saturn V. Whereas coming to your space plane, you can reuse the space plane as well as all the components of your space plane, which elaborated or which shrink that amount that has been issued to NASA for development. Now, coming to your other space program, particularly, there are few active space programs and launcher programs in the Far East with China, Japan, as well as India, and Pakistan also have space program. China and Japan both have major launch portfolios. Particularly, Sai Krishna, who was deported from United States in 1955, that China began the serious development of modern rockets. And in 1956, by the end of 1957, through the agreement of USSR, the R1 and R2 rocket technology, particularly the rocket engines, have been transferred to Chinese. Right later on, with the indigenous version of R2, Dongfeng, or also called as East Wing, they created their own indigenous versions. Now, engulfed by the cultural revolution, the program, particularly Chinese program, struggled through, and with the support of Zhou Enlai to the design of new rocket, the Changzheng, also called as the Long March rockets, have been made. And the ultimately used to launch China's first satellite in the year of 1970. It is also an year after Apollo 11. China has continued to launch satellites for communication and reconnaissance using versions of Long March since 1990. This vehicle has been available as a commercial launcher till date. The Long March used a variety of engines, all developed in China indigenously, including the use of liquid hydrogen as well as liquid oxygen. Despite the setbacks that are caused by the political upheaval in China, China decided to succeeding in establishing and maintaining indigenous modern technology. Now coming to Japan, it is also a modern democracy and rockets were developed there exclusively for non-military environment, particularly as an armature developer. Japan's first satellite, called Osumi, was launched by a rocket designed and built by what essentially a group of professors. The heritage of this remarkable success in the Japan has two space agencies. One, the Institute of Space and Astronautical Science, which is depending from the Ministry of Culture, also called as Monbusho, sorry, and the National Space Development Agency, depending on the Ministry of Industry, to build the satellites. Combined form, called as ISAS, was founded in the mid 1950s and has developed an indigenous solid fuel launchers which are exclusively used for scientific missions. These have ranged from small Earth satellites to the missions to Moon, Mars, and comets. ISAS launched Japan's first satellite in the February 1970 after the US, France, but before China and the United Kingdom. ISAS has continued to develop advanced rocket technology, including liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen engines, the experiments on electric propulsion, particularly Hall effect thrusters, which we will discuss on Module 5, and on electric propulsion, and single stage to orbit technology, which are in progress. The Japan was the fourth nation to launch the satellite, and with its two space agencies ranks as a major spacefaring nation. Later, this ISAS has been reformed or renamed as JAXA as our current spacefaring space agency in Japan. Now, India has also begun its space activities in 1972 when the first satellite was launched by USSR. But the development of native launcher by the SLV rocket, which launched the satellite Rohini in 1980, took longer. But now there is a substantial launcher capability in the names of ASLV as well as PSLV rockets that are being developed indigenously in India. Following the devastation of the Second World War, European nations entered a space age belatedly with satellite launches by France, later Britain. The National Center for Space Studies (CNES) was founded in France in the year of 1962 and retains responsibility for an active and wide-ranging national space program. Using a Diamond rocket, it launched the first French satellite, Asterix, in 1965, whereas Britain also developed a launcher to launch Prospero satellite in 1971. Now, comparing this European space program, particularly European nations, which are totally 18 states, right? 18 states, comparing with your Russian and US, these individual states are unable to compete with respect to their uh, space program. So, they were recognized by creation of European Space Agency in 1975. Now, ESA enabled the focusing of the technology programs for individual nations in a single space program, particularly combining all 18 individual European states into a single entity under ESA. Now, ESA has been remarkably successful because they are dividing their works among the different countries which are varying. Now, it is evident that many satellites which have been launched and major participation in the International Space Station, but more in the development of Ariane heavy launcher. Now, what do you mean by Ariane? Ariane is a launcher vehicle developed beginning in the year of 1979 with some developed by ESA, European Space Agency. Some around 84 launches have been completed by the year of 1996 and the versions are advancing from Ariane 1 to Ariane 4. Ariane has continued to develop and in the year of 1998, the first successful launch of Ariane 5 took place. And this all new technology with the main stage engine fueled by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen and solid boosters and most modern control and guidance systems, the space program is propelled. Thus, Europe has the most up-to-date rocket technology and is in serious contention with United States for the lucrative commercial satellite launcher market amongst the European nations. France, Germany take the lead in Ariane program, as in much Europe. Ariane 5 has recently increased to its capacity to 10 tons in geostationary transfer orbit. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.